And now to Naomi Idrissi. I hope I've pronounced that name correctly, from Woodford Green in Essex.
Wonderful pronunciation, Jonathan. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, and my view on this is that there's a lot of cant spoken about making the world a safer place and bringing tyrants to book when they infringe international law, which looks totally laughable to anyone who's got half an ear for Palestinian suffering. The point was made, I think, by Ben Bradshaw, that America has totally failed to put pressure on Israel to grant Palestinians their rights. So we've got a situation where for 6 decades Palestinians have lived in a state of permanent insecurity. Their homes, their livelihoods, their very lives are under threat from an Israeli state, which is infringing international law all the time, ignoring the United Nations all the time and faces no sanctions. And that's why Palestinian civil society has called for a boycott campaign, modelling itself on the South African anti-apartheid.
Hang on, aren't we talking about two things here? There's questions about boycotting Israeli goods, which is what I imagine you're referring to, on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the consequences of 9/11, which led to the invasion of Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, etc. I mean, Yasser Arafat, as pointed out in the programme, expressed his deep condolences after 9/11. So, are you equating the two, or are you talking about something slightly different, however important it may be?
What I'm saying is that a Western war on terror, which I do think is a terrible misnomer, as I think Simon Jenkins explained, it can't possibly succeed as long as there's this running thought, Israel remaining untouchable despite its assault on the Palestinian people. It provides a just cause for all those potential Al-Qaeda recruits out there. So that's the link. I think the Palestinian situation is central to getting us out of this hateful situation, which has been so dangerous and destructive.
So you were talking about boycott. What were you referring to? Do you think boycotts make a difference? Do you think that boycotting Israel in one way or another is likely to change Israel's attitudes into ways that would be preferable to you?
I certainly hope so, because, I mean, I am Jewish myself, and I'm sort of expected in normal discourse to support Israel and all its works. And I have to explain why I cannot do that, and I believe that Israel is on a destructive course, which is actually increasing anti-Semitism by the day by trying to associate all Jews with what Israel does. That's why the boycott movement is something which is very attractive to many Jewish supporters of Palestine. It's something that we can do. It's non-violent, and
do you boycott? Do you boycott yourself?
I certainly do. I was one of those in the Royal Albert Hall on Thursday, September the 1st, and I sang a song for Palestine during the concert. I must say, Jonathan, a lot of nonsense has been talked about this. We've been painted as jackbooted Nazis smashing up a wonderful evening of music. We didn't even interrupt the music. We delayed 2 of the pieces.
Well, actually, the music was interrupted because I heard
by
it.
The BBC.
No,
by
but the music. Yeah, but if you go on, as one does online, you can hear the Ode to Joy sung by the protesters. If you love the music that's being played, destroying that music.
The music continued. We didn't stop it. And in fact, the other 2 pieces where there was a protest, the protest took place before. And I think the point is we got publicity. When do you hear so much talk about the rights of Palestinians other than when somebody does something spectacular?
Can I put back...
The Palestinians have no choice. That's the point.
Can I put back to you a point that was made by which I happened to see, by a Palestinian violinist called Nabil Boulos, who shares your views about Israel, who's played under Daniel Barenboim in the East-West Divan Orchestra, where Palestinians, as you will surely know, Palestinians and young Israelis play together, and most people are deeply moved by that combined playing. And he says, I personally disagree with any sort of disruption of a musical event. It strikes me as a singularly unfair way of protest. Does nothing but cast a negative light on the cause that one's trying to uphold. A protest outside the hall, which if I'm right, you were participating in as well, I don't know, I'm guessing, making people aware of the issues regarding the entity they're dealing with, of course, all this is legitimate, but once people enter into the concert hall, the choice has been made, and in a free and open society, such choices should be respected. And that not to respect those choices, he makes the point, actually damages the cause.
Believe me, Jonathan, these points were debated hotly between those of us who planned this action. And there were musicians among us, and there were people who felt very unhappy about making any such intervention. However, we have been demonstrating outside concert halls, outside embassies, outside Downing Street for decades, and the world takes no note. And may I point out, the idea that music is a sort of sanctified element in our culture, I wish it could be so, but Zionists have waged their own cultural boycott campaign against Soviet orchestras and ballet companies in the 70s and 80s, disrupting performances by the Bolshoi Ballet and other orchestras, calling for Soviet Jews to be allowed to emigrate to Israel. So it seems that music and the concert hall is only sacrosanct when Israel's friends say so.
Okay.
I really do take the point. I was terrified of the thought of interrupting musicians in that venue. Terrified. But what is more important? Disrupting somebody's pleasant evening of culture, or bringing attention to a major injustice which has been a running sore on the world stage for 6 decades.
And it depends, of course, on what you think would be the response of the Israeli government to anything like that. But thank you for your call. And now this is Keith Leaper from Mould in Flintshire.
Thank you.
Hello.
I completely agree with Simon Jenkins' comments on the show. The so-called war on terror has really eroded our civil liberties. We've lost any moral authority we might have had before these attacks, and there's been enormous loss of life and wasteful expenditure in security and military costs. I think one of the things that the fundamentalist Islam wants to do is to destroy our Western states, our freedoms, and what they see as how we live decadently. And our response should be to just cherish these freedoms and do everything we can to enhance them and protect our liberties. But the response of our government and US government has been to erode these freedoms. And we've had 2 disastrous wars. And as I said, we have no moral authority. We're involved in widespread torture and rendition. And millions upon millions have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what's happened locally in Britain is that fundamentalist Islam has been fermented. And we've wasted so much money and eroded so much civil liberties. And what we've done in response to the war on terror.
An earlier caller referred to Tony Blair, and who said that, look, you can play around with the term war on terror. The term doesn't actually matter. The question is whether or not you confront what he says is the Islamic terrorism, which is an ideology which has to be defeated. And he says there is this view, which I'm afraid is, I believe, deeply naive in the West, that somehow these people, misunderstand our motives, that we've confused them, and that's why they've become radicalized. He says, on the contrary, they have an ideology and a goal, and that is the destruction of Western society.
If the ideology is to destroy Western society, they are succeeding, because we're destroying our society ourselves by what we're doing. We're eroding our civil liberties. We're restricting our freedoms. And as mentioned in the show, it's security against liberty often. And the fundamentalist Islam, locally homegrown in Britain, very likely wouldn't have developed if there hadn't been the attacks on America and the response to attacks on America.
Okay, thank you very much. Jeffrey Short now from London.
Hello, Mr. Dimbleby.
Hello.
I got in touch with the programme because I'm very concerned at the level of ignorance that surrounds the Arab-Israeli conflict, as exemplified by Ben Bradshaw in his contribution to, I think, the first question, when he said that, or implied that Israel had never offered the Palestinians their own state. Now, I would have thought that anyone having just a superficial knowledge of the conflict would be aware that the Palestinians have been offered their own state on numerous occasions, going all the way back to 1937, and have rejected every offer every time.
The debate today, given the long and very complex history, is whether or not the Palestinians should have a state based on the 1967 borders. You may correct me, but I do not believe that Israel has offered the Palestinian Authority a state based on those borders, reflecting those borders, with the right of return, which is also built into the relevant UN resolutions?
You're absolutely right that Israel hasn't agreed to offer the Palestinians a state, together with the return of the refugees. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware that the Palestinians are demanding the return of millions of Palestinians that would, in effect, nullify the concept of a Jewish state.
So is your general point that the Israelis are behaving in terms of the offer that they have made and the stance that they take, they're doing everything that they could be expected to do?
That's certainly the point that I make, but I'm also concerned to make another one, and that is that you refer to the 1967 borders, and I mentioned right at the outset that the Palestinians had been offered their own state on numerous occasions, going all the way back to 1937. And in relation to the Six-Day War of 1967, I assume that you're aware that just 1 week after the conclusion of that war, Israel offered to return virtually all the territories that had been captured in exchange for peace. And that was rejected by the Arab League in September 1967.
Well, we could go down this road and we could discuss whether or not Jerusalem was part of that, etc., etc. But I'm going to call back in who's still on the line, who was calling in earlier, who was protesting outside and inside the Albert Hall the other evening against the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra's presence. Naomi Winborn Idrissi, Geoffrey Short's making the point that this has been, on the Israeli side, a perfectly fair deal.
We're referring to
the offering of
the peace talks and so on. Ah, right. Well, I was quite amused, actually. Your caller was saying anybody who has followed this will know that Israel has been frequently offering the Palestinians a fair deal. I'm sorry. Israel has been engaged in an obfuscation for decades now. Let's engage in peace talks. Meanwhile, we will make peace impossible. 1967, I don't know what happened a week after in terms of offering land back, but I do know that within hours of the Israeli forces taking East Jerusalem, they had destroyed hundreds of houses around the Western Wall. They are now occupying East Jerusalem, making it impossible for that to be the capital of a Palestinian state, should there ever be such a thing.
Geoffrey Short. I'm going to letting Geoffrey Short in. We've got to move on, but I just want to have a quick response from you, Geoffrey Short.
I don't deny what your caller said about Israel's insistence on Jerusalem remaining the capital of a Jewish state.
Exclusively,
yeah. All I'm saying is that for nearly 80-odd years now, very generous offers of statehood have been made to the Palestinians, who have rejected all the offers. And the reason why they, in my view, reject every offer every time is because they are not and never have been interested in their own state. The only thing that they've been interested in is destroying the Jewish one.
Quick response to that, Naomi Winborn Idrissi, and then I'll move on.
Well, I refer to the point I made earlier that the Israeli peace talks have always been a cover for occupation of more and more and more Palestinian land. There are now going on 500,000 illegal Jewish settlers in the occupied territories, which makes talk of a Palestinian state pretty pointless anyway. Let's look at what is meant by a Jewish state. I'm a Jew. I'm not in favour of a racist colonial settler state being created and sustained in my name. I want to see a secular state, a state for all its citizens. Jew, Arab, Christian. People forget that there are many Christians among the Palestinian community.
That of course, incidentally, that Naomi Wimborne-Idris's point is not the position of the Palestinian Authority, which does say that there should be, that it accepts that there would be an Israeli state. But both of you, we could continue with the rest of the programme on this, and it is obviously, by common consent, an extraordinarily important issue. But we're going to go on to an important domestic issue now.